Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lark Park. I'm director of the California Education Learning Lab, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's conversation, Faculty Perspectives on Race and Gender Equity. I have three very esteemed guests with me who I'll introduce shortly, but I just wanted to highlight that this is the third in our equity conversation series. And if you missed our first two, they're available on our YouTube chat. Our YouTube link, which is in the chat. Before I introduce our guest today, just a quick word about the format of the hour. For the next 30 minutes, I'll be moderating a discussion with our panelists. Then we'll turn it over to the audience through the Q&A. You can type in your question in the Q&A box, which is part of the Zoom menu near the chat function. All of you will be able to see the questions that come in. If you like, agree with, or have a similar question to one that you see, please upvote that question with a thumbs up so that it rises to the top. Rob Charette, who is one of our program development officers, will be monitoring the Q&A. And you don't have to wait until the Q&A starts. In fact, you can put them in as we're going along, but just note that we won't turn to them until we officially start the audience Q&A. When we get close to the end of the hour, we'll do a lightning round with our panelists, give them the final word, and then we'll launch a poll at the end. So please stick around if you can. So with that, let me introduce our three panelists. They are Dolores Davison, President of the Academic Senate for the California Community Colleges. Rob Collins, Chair of the Academic Senate of the California State University, and Mary Gauvain, Chair of the Academic Senate of the University of California. Before I introduce them individually, I wanted to highlight a couple of things they have in common. One is their incredible commitment to service. Dolores and Mary have been active in their academic senates since the 1990s. And yes, they did start in elementary school. Rob is the relative newcomer with a mere 14 years under his belt in Senate activities. But their commitment to governance not only runs long, it runs incredibly deep, and they are all unbelievably hardworking and humble, and it's a real honor to have them. So individually, Dolores is a professor of history and women's studies at Foothill College. Her interests have traversed both time and space. Her academic research included the women of the Starobriadsty, and I'm okay, maybe I got that right. A dissident sect that broke off from the Russian Orthodox Church in the 17th century and settled in the fringe areas of the Russian Empire and beyond. While she hasn't exactly been chasing their descendants, Dolores has been known to travel all over the world, where she has an uncanny knack for running into people she knows. A college roommate's husband in St. Petersburg, former students in Sydney, and even an ex-boyfriend on a bridge in Florence. Dolores, I really feel like this makes you some sort of academic Kevin Bacon or Matt Damon. Everybody knows you, you're everywhere. Anyway, she's passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and bringing an anti-racism lens on the Senate's work at the community colleges. Rob Collins is Associate Professor of American Indian Studies at San Francisco State and a four-field trained anthropologist. Rob, I haven't had the nerve to ask you what a four-field trained anthropologist is and whether you lord over three-field trained anthropologists, but I'm guessing that the answer is yes. Using a person-centered ethnographic approach, Rob's research explores American Indian cultural changes and African and Native American interactions in North, Central, and South America. Another world traveler, Rob has had the honor of learning martial arts from the Beijing Wushu team. And he's the only person I know who's been pleased by a case of mistaken identity. When he was traveling in Mongolia, he, quote, had the honor while there of being mistaken for being Mongolian, and a Mongolian man yelled at me for not recognizing him as he tried to speak to me, unquote. Rob, that makes me think you're a man of many delights, if you can find pleasure in that. Last but not least is Mary Gauvain, who is a distinguished professor of psychology at UC Riverside. She's a developmental psychologist with expertise in children's thinking. Her research includes social and cultural contributions to cognitive development and the development of problem solving and planning skills. And yes, her research too is international, extending to sub-Saharan Africa. Uh, Mary notes that her plans were once foiled by a plant. A few years back, she was interested in how kindergartners plan their activities in the classroom. So she observed a class for a number of weeks and then interviewed the children about what they thought about plans when they made plans. And one boy, who, according to Mary, was very talkative and incidentally a very good planner, described how he loves plans and that he had many plans and hoped to have many more in the future. She was intrigued and so asked him what he liked most about plans. And he replied, "They're green." So foiled again, Mary. The boy loved plants, not plans. Mary says, be sure when you talk with children that you are talking about the same thing, which is actually great advice for talking to adults as well. And it leads into my very first baseline question. And I hope you can each answer it in no more than 90 seconds. No pressure, right? But the question is, when faculty talk about race and gender equity in the context of students and student success, what are they really talking about? And are they all talking about the same thing? What do we all mean? So Mary, I'm gonna let you take the first bite at this.
Okay. For us at the University of California, I would contend this is true for all educators. I certainly hope it is, that equity is really about providing students with the opportunity and support that they can succeed. And they can succeed in what they choose to do so that they can reach their aspirations in a way that enables them to have economic stability, enables them to lead a life that's fulfilling to them, and a life of dignity. Because being able to do what you want to do should not be in any way constrained by any social, demographic, organizing factors that we have a legacy of not managing very well. We want to do this well, not only for the student, we want to do it for the student because every student has this fundamental right, but we want to do it because it's so important for advancing knowledge, that understanding how it is that we can contribute to the world and enabling people to contribute in the world that fulfills them and draws on their skills is really the way to have a society. A society is a collection. And as a collection, people need to be able to be supported and do their best. So equity is just a fundamental core value.
Great. Rob.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think for the ASCSU and the faculty of the CSU, and know that the ASCSU is the official voice of the faculty on matters of curriculum. One of the things that's been important for the faculty is to really bring voice to the issues related to fairness and impartiality, which is at the core of the definition of equity. And so this can range anywhere from teaching and engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning on issues related to race, the need, for example, for equity-minded pedagogies, engaging in training related to that, whether synchronous or asynchronous teaching methods are concerned, creating men of color mentorship efforts, creating a women's caucus, for example, even within the Senate to bring issues to women's voices and needs around issues of gender inequity, I should say, as well as racism and where the two overlap. And so one of the things that we can see from faculty is that, especially in something like our recent Wang Awards, is that faculty are really using the classroom to engage these issues, not only in terms of research that helps to grow fields, but also so that they turn into pedagogical resources by which students can learn why it's important to understand fairness, what it looks like in all its dimensions, and how that lack of fairness creates inequity and impartiality. And so one of the things to point out, I think you can really see in the work of the faculty being done both inside and outside of the classroom is their love for campus and community. So that campus work that translates into community, like understanding the narratives behind cancer for Asian American women, understanding racial bias as students of color, for example, experience coming into this, the university environment. And then for faculty, the need for just to have space to discuss racial issues. All of those are part of what I think the CSU faculty are doing to engage issues of race and equity.
Dolores.
So the California Community Colleges obviously serves a much larger population, 2.1 million students. And for a very long time, conversations were centered around equality and ensuring that there was equal treatment for everyone on the campuses. I think what the faculty have begun, not recently, this is something that's been happening for a while, but have started talking about is that equality isn't going to do it. Equity is a very different point. And we need to meet our students where they are. We cannot assume, we do not have obviously entrance examinations. We do not have, as my former chancellor and former undersecretary of education, Dr. Martha Cantor used to say, we accept the top 100% of students. And so a lot of our students need to be met where they are. They need to see people that are willing to help them, that are willing to understand that perhaps they are struggling for issues that, for reasons that many of the faculty would not normally even consider. And so that question of a lens of racial and gender and socioeconomic equity is tremendously important. I know that we have questions coming up about what the Academic Senate is doing, but I would argue that at any of our 115 degree granting institutions, and the 116th, which is the fully online college, you will see faculty making significant changes throughout the institutions to ensure that equity is a central focus of everything they do, in and out of the classroom, the athletic field, the counseling office, the lab, wherever they are.
Okay, great. I think opening statements. There's certainly, I think, so much to this conversation. It is kind of a big tent in terms of, I think, what we mean by race and gender equity. But let's talk specifically about the role of faculty, separate from the role of the academic senates, which we'll get to directly afterwards. And you're touching upon some of it. But since Learning Lab is very invested as our mission with student success, tell me about the role faculty play in achieving greater racial and gender equity in that context, in the context of student success. What are faculty ready, willing, and able to do? What responsibility do they feel like they have, and what things stand in the way? Dolores, I'll throw that question back to you.
Sure, and first I want to say that trying to speak for the 58,000 plus faculty in our system as a single individual is pretty much impossible. But I can say that having worked in our system for 27 years, I have met very few faculty who are not focused on absolutely exactly what you're talking about, student success and ensuring that success is available to them both in and out of the classroom. And I think in that context, one of the things that is essential to remember about the community colleges is that success may not be defined by transferring. Success may not be defined by getting a degree from our institutions. Success may be defined as taking a skills builder course that enables them to move up the ladder at wherever they're working. Success may be a non-credit parenting class that helps them understand how better to parent their children. And so there's a tendency, unfortunately, to put metrics around student success that are in terms of grades or in terms of transfer. And really for many of our students, it's far more than that. There's far more metrics that we need to have, all of which I think can be defined and we can spell them out, but many of which we don't know for years later. The number of students who contact me 5, 6, 7 years after they've left our institutions or my institution and say, FYI, your class gave me the impetus to do this, is really significant. And as far as what individual faculty can do, I think especially in the last 10 months since the pandemic has hit and we've all basically gone to this online environment, understanding and granting empathy and having a greater sense that students are going through, as are many of our adjunct faculty, an awful lot of personal things right now that we might not know anything about. And so my team always laughs at me that kindness is one of my main pieces of like, we should always be kind and empathetic and assume good intent. I think that's true for faculty as they work with their students. We need to We need to model that behavior to assist our students and ensure that they achieve whatever their definition of success is. And a lot of times that we can push them past that and say, you know, you might think success is finishing this class, but success is actually maybe moving toward this degree. And maybe you don't think you could do it, but I think you can. And I think that's really important.
Okay, thanks, Dolores. Rob, I'm kind of curious too, because Dolores brought up this this issue of metrics, right? What are we measured by? What are whether it's faculty or students when they talk about success? Can you comment on that from like the CSU perspective, and then what else faculty can do to advance racial and gender equity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks again for this question. And I will say, I'll follow up on what my colleague Davison pointed out, is that it's virtually impossible for me to speak for the 27,000 faculty, but I did do a lot of random sample surveys to receive information back. So this is reflective of that. One of the first, I think, for a lot of what faculty are doing to enable student success is they're engaging the definition as created not only by consultation processes in the with the ASCSU, but their own aims and values as stewards of the college classroom. So student success is really around governing the most important learning aspects of the student experience. And so what this means is that faculty are really bringing to life in their pedagogies, their epistemologies that they follow, points that are relevant within student learning experiences. So culturally relevant pedagogies are being used by faculty, not only to teach about ethnic and racial diversity, but class diversity, gender and sexuality, what modes of identification all of the groups that I've just mentioned actually engage in. I think in their eagerness to engage in these issues, faculty are coming up and innovating with different forms of scholarship, research that's based in, say, communities of color that teach us, for example, most recently, the importance of ethnic studies, how that enables student achievement as opposed to just focusing on time to degree. They're also coming up with some great programs. And I mentioned, for example, men of color mentorship efforts and women of color mentorship efforts, as well as caucuses, in order to get students to not only learn the materials in the classroom, but think about how they apply to their everyday lived experiences. So what they learn is salient in their lives and career goals as they go forward. I think the third point that I'll mention is really, really important, and that is the faculty are very cognizant, and this is from STEM fields to ethnic studies, very cognizant of the barriers that students face to their achievement. We tend to focus on time to degree, but food and housing insecurity, and knowing that this is the first generation to really experience food and housing insecurity to this caliber and degree is really important, not only for enabling students to get past what can be imposter syndrome or can be this feeling of not belonging and into the mode of whatever achievement they put forward actually is good. It's what they are doing with their situation. So you will see, for example, teach-ins surrounding food and housing insecurity, wedded with courses that are actually engaging the study of poverty, not just in communities of color, but across the United States. You'll see this even in engineering projects where people are talking about water resources. And so one of the main things that they want to pull from that are the cultural issues that are related to these water resources and how that might, for example, that lack of water or that lack of resource can contribute to the type of lived experience you see among a group of people. And so when students have these tools in their arsenal, I can say, they actually are able to translate their own lived experiences and not into barriers, but into resources that enable them to understand the subject matter that's covered in the classroom.
Wow. So I'm hearing about a lot of creativity and dynamism in the classroom and a lot of empathy in terms of what faculty can do and are doing, and what in the present moment you're finding really important in terms of encouraging students and keeping them engaged. Mary, what's the UC perspective on this?
Okay, I want to talk about how I think probably the UC realizes these goals in what we do. And the way I think we realize it the most is in our classroom activities and in how we work with students beyond the classroom. And so what I'm talking about here is that one of the real strengths of the University of California is we have a lot of ongoing research activity. And we really value having students engaged in that activity in the classroom and thinking about how do you think about evidence, how do you think about knowledge, how do you understand the world you live in that way. And then students on my campus at UCR, which is very diverse, we have students, the majority of our undergraduates are involved at some point in their training in a research lab of some degree. And now I'm not just talking about STEM labs. I'm talking about all kinds of research activities. Every faculty member has research going on, and they work with teams of students in developing their ideas. Where this plays a really important role in issues of equity is that one of the ways we learn to live together in a diverse community is to see each other in true exercises of competence. And what you see in research labs or in discussions about subject matter is engagement with material that is really at a level of expertise by the students, because they're all learners at a particular stage, either in the lab or in the classroom. And being a participant in that is really, in addition to learning the content, you're participating in a body of people who are diverse in creating the content. And so it's really hearkening back to ideas, not of modeling per se, but actually ideas of how we interconnect with people and we start to understand all of our strengths as opposed to the stereotypes we usually carry around when we don't actually interact with one another.
Yeah, Mary, I think your comments bring up two interesting points, right? Is one, the focus on active learning, being an active learner, and I know that a lot of your research goes towards that. Do you think that there is enough focus on active learning within the UC environment? Have you seen it change over the recent time period?
Well, I define active learning, I think, somewhat differently than some people might define it. Learning in and of itself is an active act. It's a verb, right? So in fact, we only care about it because it's active. If it were passive, if nothing happened, we wouldn't even talk about it. So even when we're interacting with others and we're not physically doing something, though in laboratory work, we are physically doing things, but even in a classroom, the activity of learning is very subtle as we see one another, as we lean forward when we're listening to content, as we hear other questions that then reinforce our understanding and say, oh, that's like what I was thinking too. That not only helps us sort of feel a legitimacy to our thought processes as students, it actually provides a form of what I would call intellectual courage in feeling confident in your ideas. And so social learning is very complex. And to me, that's a very active part of learning. I also add, not to sort of draw this out, but human beings are very good social learners. We've been doing it for about 40,000 years, give or take a couple of years. And so the idea that we know how to do this when we watch other learners and we participate in a learning community, to me, that's what active learning is. And then if in a discipline, if it can be also infused with some physical activity, problem solving of some sort, data gathering and all of that, then it's also enriched. So I would define it very broadly.
No, and that's great. And I think it ties very much into the empathy that both Rob and Dolores brought up, right? Is that, like, me too, I think that this ability to connect with your other students or with faculty. Let's move on to the role of academic senates. This is your home turf, right? The role that academic senates can play. And Marisa, who is Learning Lab's other program development officer, is going to put some resources in the chat at this point. And Rob, this time I'll start with you, since most of these are from the CSU. There are many resolutions represented here over decades. And so the CSU Academic Senate seems to have a very long-standing passion, right, for race and gender equity. But I want to ask a more pointed question is, what impact do you think these resolutions have had? And what more can academic senates do as a body specific to eliminating racial and gender equity gaps?
This is, again, another wonderful question. I would say that the academic senates bring voice to the issue. And what academic senates, and especially the ASCSU, even past my time, can continue to do is to continue to bring voice to the issues, whether it be food and housing insecurity that was informed by collaboration with, say, CSSA, and a ton of feedback from student lived experiences are coming that way, or in consultation with the administration in terms of what are the actual needs of the faculty and are they being met by administrative innovation. And then with the union, for example, what are the overlaps in areas where the work environment is actually, in lack of infrastructure, is a barrier to faculty success, which is indelibly a barrier to student success. And so I think one of the reasons why I inundated you with resolutions is that you can see that the ASCSU has had a long time to think about these, and they have been done through a lens which this year the executive committee, we've defined as common unity, to really get us to think about how we get to positive outcomes. So whether that be for providing a welcoming environment for African-American students and African-American faculty, given our current situations that we've had, all the way to land acknowledgement for Native Americans, and particularly the lands upon which our institutions of higher learning reside. The Faculty Senate can really, because we speak through resolution, which is really a recommendation, in my opinion, we can offer the campuses recommendations so then they can create policies, and that's the power that campus-based senates have over us, over the statewide Senate. They can create policies according to their aims and values that nuance those issues. So if there's an issue with self-identification, he, she, or they, which is something that SF State did a long time ago, but say, for example, this is now new for another campus within the CSU, they can actually piggyback off of what, say, one campus has done to create a new policy that actually gets at those issues for LGBTQ students that really make them have a sense of belonging. The other would be, say, for example, I mentioned mentioned Native America. Oftentimes, Native American students are considered statistically insignificant because the population is so low. This is problematized because most of the population is mixed blood or two or more races. What campuses can do based upon the recommendations made from the Senate is create policies that allow for that disaggregation. And so you can actually begin to see the significance of student achievement, even if that population is considered statistically insignificant. And this can be seen with African-American students, Hmong, for example, et cetera, within our system. And so I think one of the things that the Senates really do is steer the ship, bringing together the voices to say what the common voice is. I think that's what the ASCSU does. And then make recommendations back to the campuses in terms of what we can all do together to address the issue. And one of the ones that I'm most proud of is really collaborating on food and housing insecurity. Our CSSA, or our Student Senate, was an incredible voice, and they still are, in this area, as well as fixed financial aid. And that is actually getting at the barriers to student success that faculty we talk about all the time. Our students are hungry, they can't study. But for legislators, I think sometimes it's, what does that look like? And the students are the best ones to tell that story. We can make the recommendations to the campuses, the campus senates can create the policies, but who tells that story the best? Those who are experiencing what we've implemented in order to ensure their success.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that the academic senates, you can craft resolutions, you can make recommendations, and you're having this dialogue in these different venues, but that policy per se is something that you can contribute to, but it's not necessarily the academic senate's role to make that policy, but to recommend that policy, provide feedback to that policy. Is that how you're
For the statewide Senate, it's not the statewide Senate's responsibility to create policy. That's to the autonomy of the campuses. So the campuses have the autonomy to construct policy. And so I really think that it's a great feedback mechanism for campuses, especially, and having been on my campus Senate for quite some time, it's a great it's a great way for campus Senates to go, how salient is this concern to us? And when it is salient, especially food and housing insecurity, especially living in San Francisco, yes, we need a policy that ensures that emergency loans are available to students, that the administration pays attention to it. However, if it's something that really doesn't pertain to us, if it's a rural concern, and SF State, for example, or Los Angeles or San Diego are all urban universities, that's where the campus-based Senate can say, oh, that may not be an issue for us, but maybe there's a thread of first generation concern in students that we might need to take a look at. So that's a wonderful way to be self-reflexive and say, you know, while instead of dismissing the issue, while that may not be a concern for us, we can take a nugget of knowledge from what our fellow campuses are doing to see if that might address some of the concerns that our students are in need of having addressed.
Great. Dolores, what do you think in the context of the California community colleges?
So 115 academic senates plus a dozen, 10 district senates. We basically are in every county except one. And so the point that Rob made about how things may impact a certain campus and not another are even more clear for us for the state system, for the academic senate. I will say that one of the things that I think was most valuable is that the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges has really been trying to model behavior for our local senates. Our local senates have recommending advisory powers. They obviously always have to defer, well, maybe not obviously to all of you, but final decisions are always made by their local board of trustees. But the Academic Senate is relied upon locally for all academic and professional matters, and curriculum grading, all of those fall under there. They're either relied primarily or they mutually agree with the board. And to a certain degree, the same is true for the statewide academic senate. We work very closely with our chancellor's office in developing policies and regulation and information to disseminate to all of our colleges. But modeling that behavior for our local senates, I think, is really important. Our last several years, our plenary sessions have focused around equity. We have had a number of webinars and other events focused on equity. We have deliberately sought out diversifying the faculty on our executive committee. We are currently 60% people of color and 73% women. Compared to 4 years ago when those numbers were nowhere near that. In fact, we were at, I believe, 20% people of color. And so significant changes, modeling those, making sure that everyone in our system sees how important that we're living the talk of equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. We have done, when I saw Rob's collection of resolutions, I was like, well, how far back do ours go that I can research? And the first year that we have them on our website is 1986. And there are already resolutions in there about working toward assisting, pardon the language, because this is what is in the 1986 resolution, but minority students, which we know are no longer minority students, they are the majority of our students. Around things, helping in the classroom, expanding student services, ensuring that all students have an equal access or have equal access and equitable access now to everything that they need. And to that end, one of the main things we've been working on this last couple of years is diversifying our faculty ranks at all of our institutions. We know that this has been something where there's been a bit of a stall. We've been working with our Chancellor's Office EEO Advisory Committee. We have a series of training modules to help those who are serving on hiring committees deal with some of the things that they don't even realize they're dealing with. Implicit bias, where advertising is going. Our minimum qualifications for all of our positions are a master's degree or a bachelor's or associate's in work experience. Why are you requiring a PhD when you're hiring? Why are you not considering, why are you demanding that someone have California Community College teaching experience? You've just wiped out everyone who has experience at an HBCU. Why are you doing that? So those conversations, I think that's one of the most valuable roles that the statewide academic senate can play, is engaging in those conversations with our local leaders, both our academic senate leaders and our administrative leaders and our classified professionals. And as Rob mentioned, most valuably in many ways, our students. Having our student voice heard is so significant and so important. And having our adjunct faculty, our newer faculty who do, we are seeing some diversification. All of that is significant, because I'm not going to be in this system another 27 years, I hope, because I do not want to be doing this 27 years from now. I mean, I could be, I guess, but hopefully not. And so we need to be able to provide that, that sort of torch for people to carry on, to pass on, and to continue this work and expand on it and deepen it and involve all the voices. So I think for the statewide academic senate, those are among the most important things we're doing. I have such a list I could leave, but if you have an opportunity to go to our site, we do have a lot of resources listed there and a lot about what we're doing right now. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dolores. And then Mary, you can have the last word before we go to audience Q&A. What's the perspective here? What is your perspective?
Okay. The Academic Senate at the University of California is in some ways very similar to what has been described. So we're structurally different. We have 10 campuses, and then we have a lot of health centers as well as hospitals and so on, and other kinds of outlying sites like the laboratories and all of that. But what we do at the Academic Senate is we have committees on the campuses that are mirrored in a system-wide larger committee. And what we try to do is develop policies that pertain to academic matters, as well as other matters that are really very centrally relevant to this discussion. So our committees on educational policy are very concerned with, and we have created many policies over the years that are really directed toward fairness in the classroom, fairness on the campus, and so on for students, for all our students. We also have committees that focus on faculty experience. And these committees are very involved right now, in fact, in trying to think of a way to create a more supportive advancement environment for faculty, especially for younger faculty, for more diverse faculty, for caregivers who are on the faculty, so that they can make it through this particular period. So how can we create policies? And the important point here is in creating policies is that we can establish norms, but norms can fade. They sort of rely on just people practicing them. So policies really formalize what we want to do and our values are. Of course, translating policies into actual practices on the ground always requires vigilance and clarity about what your goals are. Our ability to participate in shared governance at the university is really a strength of the Academic Senate for the University of California. And it's here we benefit from being able to be involved in an advisory role on so many matters that reach beyond the classroom, but are really important for equity and fairness. For example, budgetary matters. And so that kind of activity that the Senate can engage in is really valuable for us and for the university.
Thank you. Thanks for all of these really rich answers. So now we're going to go to audience Q&A. We have 13 distinct questions, but lots of upvoting, meaning, other people are saying, I have this question too. Rob, Charette, you've been monitoring the Q&A, and if you can paraphrase as best as you can or consolidate where you see as necessary. So what is the first question from the audience?
Yeah, so we had a lot of questions related to the equity-minded pedagogy. And so it's a couple-part question that I'm going to ask. So maybe we could spend a little bit of time because there were quite a few questions about this. But first of all, can any of you just provide an example of what equity-minded pedagogy looks like? And then kind of a follow-up, do we know what proportion of faculty are using equity-minded pedagogy? And if not, do you have a sense of the commitment from faculty in your respective segments to using equity-minded pedagogy?
Okay, I'll throw that out to Dolores first. Example and what percentage? Does anybody know? Should we track it?
I'll start with the first question because that's the easier one. I don't think that we can give you a percentage of how many faculty are. But if I were to judge by the number of faculty who have been attending the various professional development trainings about learning about how to decolonize your literature choices, for example, or how to decolonize your curriculum, it's a little easier for, well, I don't know if I'd say easier. It's more obvious perhaps in something like a history course than it might be in others. But when we're talking about racial and gender equity and the pedagogy around that, I would say that given the numbers of faculty that have been attending these professional development events, if they have not all heard about it at this point, I don't know where they've been. There may be some missing, but it's hard to judge, and judge is the wrong word. It's hard to tell because we are all online. We're not seeing each other. We're not having those hallway discussions. We're trying to do that over Zoom, but it's more difficult to have that, hey, have you thought about why we're using this textbook instead of this textbook? Let's talk about that. Why are we even using a textbook? Why aren't we using OER? Why are we not doing these sorts of things? And so I can't give you a percentage, but I know there are a lot of faculty that are very interested in that, and there are a lot of faculty that are joining in the conversations. And I want to say one of the most gratifying things is we're seeing them from across the disciplines. It's not just the social obvious choices. We're seeing STEM faculty and performing arts faculty and kinesiology and athletics faculty joining in those conversations, and language arts and all of those different groups. And so I think that it's a very important part of what we're doing to provide that equity balance at our campuses.
Great, and thank you for that plug for OER. I really appreciate that. Rob or Mary, do you want to just jump in quickly? And I'm just going to point out the briefer your answers, the more questions we can get through. So do you want to jump in about an example or, any feel for percentages?
I'll let Mary go first.
Yeah, one thing I find among our faculty and their interest is how to create in the classroom environment an atmosphere where students feel they can contribute, that there aren't sort of people who through their behaviors are basically gatekeeping who gets to participate and who can't participate. And so just some of the more subtle things that we can do, because everyone wants their students to be able to really engage with the material. That's how we all do better work. And so when that's restricted, it really makes for a less interesting class and a less productive class. So some of these insights that people in all disciplines can use about how do you really engage students more fully in the classroom seem to be what people on our campuses are really hungry for.
Okay. Rob.
Yeah, I would say an example would be if you were in a theory class, showing students the theoreticians from various ethnic backgrounds. If you are in a class where, especially like chemistry, show chemists of color as well as those who are maybe of various different sexual orientations or identifications. And what that does is it enables the student to see themselves in the classroom, in the course material. I would say also that as far as measures, it's a work in progress. But I think one great measure we could use is a lot of this adaptation to remote learning. A lot of the institutes for teaching and learning, not just the central one and the CSU, have provided a lot of resources for enabling faculty to experience the tools necessary to create the equity-minded pedagogies. And so I would say those rural campuses I referred to, Stanislaus, Bakersfield, for example, Fresno, they have institutes on their campus where faculty are being exposed to these resources as tools. And I think that's back to Mary's point. The question becomes, to what extent is that faculty member using them? And so, like I said, it's a work in progress, but one which I would love to see an understanding of.
All right, put a pin in that for further discussion. Rob Charette, what's the next sort of question or set of questions?
Sure. So there were a few that were related to the student success discussion. And given the way you all contextualize student success and the kind of empathetic approach you took, um, what, how do you reconcile that approach with the reality that students face that GPA matters and that often students and faculty of color are reporting having to navigate that high stakes environment in kind of unique ways?
All right, that's a great question. Who wants to go? Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to nerd out. I think one thing to really pay very close attention to is student achievement. And student achievement actually can tell you more than the GPA can. And so in a sense, the student's writing ability may not correlate with GPA. The student's ability to articulate the course material. And I've had students that, for example, I've talked to other faculty who've had this, where the student can tell you everything that they've read, but they may have an undiagnosed learning disability. These are all criteria that can really enable us to think beyond just the GPA. So I don't recommend necessarily that we interview our students, but we do get to know them, or as Dolores pointed out, meet them where they are. If we know this about the student, then we can provide them with the resources necessary to build that GPA, or as I've done personally, create different methods for assessment in my class so that that student who has that undiagnosed learning disability, while they're trying to get diagnosed for it or get the work necessary for our disabled persons program so they can have more time on their exams, they're also telling me about the material in a way that best shows how they've been able to achieve in my class.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Unless Mary or Dolores really want to jump in with a response, I'll ask Rob Charette to go to the next type of question or set of questions.
Sure. There was one that was upvoted a lot that I haven't gotten to yet, and I'll just, I think, ask the quick question. How do you best call in those who are resistant to exploring pedagogical change and growth with respect to issues of race and gender equity? What are our most significant obstacles as we reach out?
Mary or Dolores, why don't one of you handle that one?
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, this is where I take advantage of my knowledge as a psychologist. Okay. When you look at information that's available about the world, and we see that the kind of information, for example, that's included in data, the data on children that we look at, that we think we know about children from, has been collected on less than 5% of the world's children. So there's sort of, and if you don't have a semblance of how gender, for example, plays into your discipline, then you can't really explain the gender patterns that may exist in the profession. And so what becomes really important is to challenge people with the actual reality of how these inequities play out in real life, how much less we know when we ignore many people in the world, or how much less we can do with the skills and problems we want to solve if we don't have everyone participating who wants to participate in them. So I actually use sort of the hard sell of like, it's not very rational for you to take this approach, so maybe you should think about it differently.
I love that, Mary. There's so many good questions in here that I'm reading, so I'm gonna just say, let's go to the next question.
Oh boy, I was trying to figure out what the next question was gonna be.
Rob, I love
okay, go ahead.
What's the vision of for equity 10 years from now? What should it look like? Dolores, you that's what
I was like, well, it's clearly going to me as the one that didn't answer one of the first two gnarly questions that are awesome. Well, in my Pollyanna, I wish that we wouldn't even have to have this conversation 10 years from now because it would all be done. That is not going to be the case. I think that 10 years from now, we are looking at an increasingly diverse faculty to serve our increasingly diverse students. We are seeing improvements in hopefully all areas of student life so that all student basic needs are being met. You can't teach students when they don't have somewhere to sleep at night, and that's what they're worried about. It's hard to teach them when they can't eat and they're starving and they're in your classroom. I would like to think that California, one of the richest states in the United States and one of the richest areas in the world, would be able to take care of all of our students. The other piece of equity, honestly, that I have to mention is our adjunct faculty, which at the California community colleges makes up a huge portion, well over half. And those faculty need to be treated well. They need to be compensated well. They need to be, they need to receive parity of some kind so that they're not living in their cars and trying to teach our students. So I guess for me, that would be, again, I tend to get Pollyanna-ish about this, and I'm hoping everything will be great, but recognizing that we've got a lot of work to do and that everybody will join in that work. I guess that would be my final hope.
Okay, Rob, next question. Rob Charette, next question.
Okay, so there's a couple that pertain to faculty diversity. One person asked what I feel like is a rhetorical question: how important is diversity among the professoriate? But then followed up with saying, how can we move from talking about what change might look like to actually holding campuses accountable for achieving equity and diversity goals?
All right, back to Rob.
I was hoping I would get this question. I would just say that diversity it's a given. The need for it is an ongoing project. Many fields have not had many people of color as part of their faculty cadre. And so by consequence, it's still a work in progress. One of the things that the campuses can do is to really come up with strategies for ensuring that there is outreach during the hiring process to bring in faculty of color. That means diversifying the perspectives on where to look for faculty of color. And oftentimes you can get the engineer, the sociologist, the anthropologist, the art professor who doesn't necessarily feel an affinity to their field because their experiences have been with race and racism or gender inequities, and they will gravitate towards, for example, ethnic studies, or they'll gravitate towards women and gender studies. And so in some cases, you can have those individuals from those quote unquote major fields inside of those smaller fields that people think, oh, they're not doing that work, but actually they're doing great work. And during the hiring process, this is where one can really think about what organizations, if I were, say, for example, a chemist of color, which organizations might I look to in order to feel not only that I had a sense of belonging, but also that I can continue to do my work, for example, as a chemist. And I use that example because I've had personal experience with that prior to coming to the CSU. And that will really enable the hiring committee then to have a field or develop a pool of candidates that can actually reflect that diversity. But there is a caveat. It is important to know that nationally, if you have one person in physics who is African-American dynamo, every university within the country is probably after that same individual. So it's kind of a catch-22. You may seek diversity, but because of maybe your pay or the package you offer that faculty, you may not be able to retain it because everybody wants that individual. So thank you for that question. It's wonderful.
Rob, I heard pathway and recommendations. I'm not sure I heard accountability per se, but we're going to go to the next question.
Can I just say accountability very briefly? And one can actually have that hire based on, or actually that would actually be above my pay grade. Provosts can ensure that the hiring pool is diverse in order for that hire to go through.
All right, so in the next event, we should bring the provost on. Okay, Rob, next question.
Okay, I'm gonna take this question because of my personal bias. Maybe this person asked about the connection between student affairs professionals and faculty. Said that student affairs professionals are constantly doing diversity and inclusion work. It feels like, and are often desperate partners to faculty. So what advice do you have for creating those partnerships and expressing the importance of faculty participating in student affairs faculty partnerships?
I'm happy to take that one. A couple of things. The community colleges are slightly different in that our counselors are virtually all faculty. And so they already are faculty. And so hopefully we are working with our student services faculty in that area. But I think that one of the things that tends to get left out of these conversations is the importance of our classified professionals. And that includes probably most prominently in some cases our student services professionals. Those are oftentimes the first people that the students encounter when they come onto campus, once we're back in person, whenever that is. It's often the first person that they have any kind of interaction with. And the faculty need to be aware of that. They need to work with those student services professionals and with the classified professionals in our system to ensure that all of them, that instruction is happening with everyone in terms of diversity, that seeps into every single element of the campus. It has to be every part of the campus, and it probably can start with the faculty as the leaders on the campus, but if we don't talk with and bring along our classified professionals, it's never going to happen. They are absolutely vital to everything that happens on our campuses, and you ignore them at your own peril when it comes to getting this work done.
Right, that's a wonderful point, Dolores. I mean, this is a team sport, so to speak, right? It's not just about individuals acting.
Right.
Rob, I think we have time for one more question.
Right. I'll take one here about accessing professional development opportunities. For folks who are trying to create equitable access to curriculum and create equitable instruction, where would you all say to go to get the professional development and support on this?
Mary?
Yeah, I find that a lot of our professional societies are very committed to these kinds of efforts. And at least on UC campuses, faculty are very connected to their professional societies. That's where they engage with like-minded scholars in their fields, as well as present at conferences and so on. And professional societies are very committed to these issues and organizing a lot of things that can help faculty locate how to think about these issues and work on these issues, but from within their discipline, which is really where people feel they can perhaps make the biggest impact, is through their discipline and promoting individuals who want to be engaged in the work that they do, but feel there are barriers and helping them get there.
Great. All right. We're going to go to the lightning round, which is going to be lightning fast. So your answer must be very, very brief. Best source of inspiration during COVID, Mary?
Oh gosh. My colleagues that are teaching while they're taking care of their children and their parents and everything else. I'm amazed.
Rob?
Jacques Pepin, Dr. Fauci, and pocketbook of words of Martin Luther King.
Nice. Dolores?
My 81-year-old father, who got his first round of vaccinations yesterday and has basically not left his house for almost 10 months. And I'm so excited that he's going to be able to actually go out a little bit now that he's on the road.
That is wonderful news. Okay, legislative intervention. Love it, hate it, or it's complicated. Dolores?
It's complicated.
Mary?
Complicated, but edging toward the negative.
I'll change my answer to align with Mary's, yes.
Rob?
It's complicated.
Just right in the middle, right? Okay. What is the one thing that you think can be done to move this ball forward? And we're, you know this conversation that we've been having. One thing to move the ball forward. Rob?
Keep talking. This is a work in progress.
Mary?
Leadership. We have learned a lot in the last few years about the value of leadership. And this is another place where we should apply that lesson.
Dolores?
Collaboration. If we don't have the buy-in from our four-year university partners, including AICCU and the HBCUs, we don't go anywhere.
Okay, wonderful. One thing that you would say about what you admire about your counterpart, again, super quick. Dolores, about Mary.
I love that she not only teaches undergraduate and lower division students, but that she is absolutely brilliant when it comes to understanding the mind, and she awes me every time I talk to her.
Mary, about Rob.
Rob is amazing. He is a working anthropologist because he has just gone into this world of academia. Only an anthropologist could do it as well as you do.
Rob, about Dolores.
She's a great listener and just an amazing person. It's an honor to collaborate with her.
And I know you all have happy hour offline, and I know you all really like each other. So that is a huge benefit. So I just want to thank all the attendees for participating in this webinar, as well as the three of you. Before we let you go, I just want to ask you to respond to the poll that Rob Charette will be launching. I also wanted to highlight that the last conversation that we are going to have is on Friday, February 12th. And it is the syllabus as an equity practice. It'll take place on Friday, February 12th from 12 to 1, and we'll be bringing back nationally renowned expert on racial equity, Estella Ben-Simon. So I hope you'll all sign up for that event. I want to thank you for your interest in the topic of racial equity, especially in the context of what faculty think can be done. Please sign up for our listserv if you'd like to receive announcements in the future about our events and grant opportunities. We'll send everybody, all the registrants, a link to the recording of this webinar on the Learning Labs YouTube channel, and a link to the next equity conversation, the next and final. And that after that, we'll take a big break until the summer, when hopefully everyone will have a chance to catch their breath. So thanks to Dolores, Mary, and Rob for a great conversation. We hope there will be more in the future. And so have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.